Why Delaware? Why is Delaware an unnecessary concern? Is what this discussion is about. I will summarize these concerns about establishing a company within 10 minutes. According to a recent report by the Wall Street Journal, Mark Zuckerberg is considering moving Meta's corporate registration. So today, I'm not primarily focusing on introducing this newspaper article. Through this article, I want to discuss the topic of establishing a corporation in Delaware, which many of us are curious about. First, let's take a closer look at the article. In 2004, since Facebook was established as a corporation, it has been registered in Delaware, and now there's talk of possibly moving this registration to another state. Recently, coincidentally, Elon Musk's Tesla has also experienced similar situations. They have gone through such experiences. So, Tesla actually moved its headquarters to Texas. Considering all these factors, it seems like a decision being pondered over. In the case of Meta, its current headquarters is in Menlo Park, California, a region where many tech companies are concentrated. Although it's located there, the incorporation itself was done in Delaware. So, when you ask what Delaware is all about, in the United States, you can establish a company in any of the 50 states. It's actually independent and unrelated to where you conduct business, but among them, Delaware is most famous for being an incorporating state. More than 2/3 of companies like Standard & Poor's, S&P 500 companies, and other Fortune 500 companies are incorporated in Delaware. I'll talk more about this later, but there are several reasons for it. It's about why Delaware is preferred as a place of incorporation. Simply put, there is a specialized court that handles corporate litigation, and there are many precedents accumulated compared to other states, which helps in terms of predictability. However, recently, there has been dissatisfaction that the management and major shareholders of publicly listed companies registered in Delaware have been receiving rulings that are too favorable to minority shareholders. In certain lawsuits, as a result, there have been discussions about whether Delaware is losing some of its traditional advantages. For instance, Meta is currently involved in several ongoing lawsuits related to privacy policies and data protection. There's also this background. There's talk that Mark Zuckerberg of Meta is making a lot of efforts to win favor with President Trump. But recently, there's analysis suggesting that he is following Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, who has emerged as a close confidant. That's one of the analyses out there. In fact, Musk himself, was it in 2018? At that time, there was a massive compensation package approved by Tesla's board for him. However, a minority shareholder in Delaware filed a lawsuit against it, saying it was unacceptable. The ruling came out in favor of the minority shareholder. As a result, Tesla even moved its corporate headquarters to Texas. Considering all these factors, rumors are emerging, but Meta has officially stated that it currently has no plans to relocate its headquarters from California. Apart from relocating the headquarters, changing the place of incorporation is actually a different issue. Anyway, they did not make any further comments on that. This is the latest news about Meta. Relocating the corporate headquarters and the place of incorporation. It means moving the state where the company was incorporated, possibly from Delaware to somewhere else, including Texas. And Delaware is a state where most Fortune 500 and S&P 500 companies are established. It has a court specializing in corporate law and a wealth of case law. Because of this, Delaware has been favorable for business activities due to its predictability. However, recently, rulings in lawsuits by minority shareholders have not been favorable to companies, leading to growing dissatisfaction. As an example, in the case of Musk, when a minority shareholder challenged the compensation package approved by the board, the court ruled in favor of the minority shareholder. These kinds of issues are leading to movements to leave Delaware. This is actually today's topic. What exactly is it about the state of Delaware that makes it so popular as a place to establish a company? So, in what situations should I choose Delaware, and in what situations is it not necessary? I've been discussing this as a background to talk about that topic. Now, let's get into the main discussion. Before we start talking, this channel provides professional information about US law, tax law, and financial planning in an easy-to-understand way. Not just this video. We will continue to upload more beneficial content in the future. I hope you don't miss out. To ensure that, if you haven't already, please subscribe and like. Now, the likes are about 10%. Please, help us raise it to 20%. Incorporating a company. They said you can do it in all 50 states of the United States. And they mentioned that most large corporations and publicly traded companies choose Delaware. So when choosing the state for incorporation, you should consider factors like the business purpose, future investment locations, and operational methods to make your decision. First of all, let's take a look at the reasons for choosing Delaware. There are several reasons. First, convenience and cost can be mentioned. What I mean is the establishment process. Compared to other states, it is very simplified. The processing time is fast. Traditionally, for over 200 years, a significant portion of Delaware state revenue has come from corporate formation services, to the extent that it is a business model. For the state government actively supports it. This can be mentioned. Therefore, the establishment process is simplified, and the ongoing registration management costs are also very reasonable compared to other states. The relatively low establishment and maintenance costs, such as franchise taxes, are lower compared to other states. This means that the administrative procedures are simplified, and as mentioned briefly before, we can expect consistency in case law and legal interpretation. This is because many companies operate here, naturally leading to an accumulation of case law. Since litigation precedents are accumulated, when making decisions, you can better predict the outcomes and how things will proceed. If you face a lawsuit compared to other states, that would be the first reason. The second reason is this. This is important both in terms of protecting investors and also in terms of protecting shareholders. What does this mean? Firstly, it's not a jury trial but a bench trial by a judge, or what is called a jury trial in the US, where the decision is made by the judge, not the jury. As a result, when a jury makes a decision, it's not about right or wrong, but there's a risk of being swayed by public opinion. In contrast, the outcome of the trial is determined by a judge with legal expertise, making it much easier and preferable for companies to predict litigation risks. That's something that can be said. Next, another point is about investor protection. Preferred stock. The regulations for preferred stock are much more flexible. For example, when a company, like a startup, receives investment, then there are various venture capitals. VC stands for venture capital. In these cases, even though they are preferred stock investors, they want to be heavily involved in the company's operational decisions. Without making the discussion too complicated, these investors have much more advantageous shareholder rights in participating in the company's decision-making compared to other states. So, when a VC is selecting a PE investment company, they are reluctant to invest, unless it's a Delaware Corporation. You could look at it this way. Then the third point is, does this disadvantage the common shareholders? That's not the case either. In terms of disclosing shareholder information or making certain decisions, it is also very friendly to major shareholders. It also excels in protecting anonymity compared to other states. Additionally, it is more advantageous in protecting the interests of majority shareholders from the claims of minority shareholders. As previously mentioned, these aspects are the reasons why Delaware is favored in terms of investor preference and shareholder protection. In this context, whether it's a large corporation or a small startup, these factors are considered reasons for generally choosing Delaware. But there is one additional point to mention here. When I provide consultations, some people say that Delaware is better because it has lower tax rates compared to places like California. That's not the case. Just because you establish a corporation in Delaware doesn't mean it's better due to lower state taxes compared to California. First of all, the federal corporate tax is the same for all U.S. corporations, regardless of where they are established. And as for state corporate taxes, it's not about where you establish the corporation, but where you actually conduct your operations, so establishing in Delaware doesn't necessarily reduce taxes. That's not correct. However, considering the two reasons mentioned earlier, you can see that a large number of major corporations and startups choose Delaware for those reasons. Now, let's move on to the second topic. When is establishing in Delaware particularly advantageous? I have already explained most of it earlier. For startups and tech companies, especially those looking to attract VC or large series round funding in the future, if you are planning such things, then forming a Delaware corporation is not even a matter of consideration. It's something you absolutely must do, because from the investor's perspective, even if I'm a VC, I'm hesitant to invest unless it's a Delaware corporation. And another point is, if you're aiming for M&A or going public, there are large capital transactions involved. And since the stock structure can become more complex, the legal stability of being in Delaware shines even more in such cases. So it increases the predictability based on precedents. And if disputes arise between the company receiving investment and the investors, it will be much smoother to mediate these. In that regard, if you have such goals, you must definitely consider establishing in Delaware. So now let's move on to the third point. There are places where it's not absolutely necessary to choose Delaware. If the advantages I've mentioned aren't particularly important, there's no need to go to Delaware. You can establish it in the state where you're actually operating. For example, it's a family business. It's a small business. If you're not looking to attract external investment or need a complex equity structure, it's much more practical to establish in the state where you're actually doing business. There would also be cost-saving benefits. There's absolutely no need to go to Delaware. Another example is a U.S. subsidiary of a Korean corporation. Let's call it a local corporation. In this case, ultimately, the 100% shareholder, generally the Korean parent company, or it's the family of the parent company's owner. In that case, the advantages we talked about aren't really necessary. So, rather than complicating procedures or incurring additional management costs for benefits that aren't really needed, it might be better to establish the company in the state where the business is conducted. That's all for now. We looked into the news about Meta's relocation, company establishment. It's about Delaware. For those who are considering which state to establish their company in, they might wonder why Delaware is recommended. Does it apply to us as well, or does it not apply? This was an explanation of the considerations involved. I hope it was helpful. That's all for today's content. I believe there are people around you who need this kind of information. This channel is a space for growing together with you. Please subscribe and at least like the video so you don't miss out on essential information next time. I ask for your help in sharing it with those around you. Bet you.